is my great honor to welcome Liz Kleinrock to Central tonight and to join Liz in conversation. So Liz, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Wow, this is so exciting. We've done so much stuff online together, so to get to be in real life is very, very exciting.
We've worked together online, we have friends online, but yeah, this is amazing.
Yeah, mutual college friends that we figured out we had much later on, so yeah.
It's exciting to be here with you, and thank you for joining us. And I think this day kind of has extra significance if you want to speak to that.
Sure. I think when we had planned this event, we didn't even realize that we had scheduled this on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and so it feels a bit remiss to start this without mentioning that, to paying tribute to the ancestors that we all hold in this room around sacrifices, around luck, around just simply good fortune that leads so many of us to just simply be physically where we are today, and to perhaps take a moment to remember those who are not with us.
Thank you. And in your book, you do so much kind of beautiful recovery work where you're finding new stories and or really bringing new stories to light of people who for years have just kind of expanded notions of what Judaism looks like. And so it is such a fitting tribute that when so many stories were lost and that today we can kind of speak about people who've come before us. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for giving this space.
Yeah, can you hear us? You can't hear us at all.
Sorry,
That
we
better?
will speak up. Sorry
gosh.
about that.
Should we do that again about Holocaust Remembrance Day? Sorry about that. Thank you.
I guess I could do an intro too.
Yeah, well,
right?
let's do it.
We just kind of like jumped into
We'll
this
jump
because
in.
we know each other.
Tell us about the book. Tell us about you.
Sure. Okay, so hi everybody. If you are in person here in this room, thank you so much for being here. It is a Monday evening and you're here, so thank you. There's so many things that you could be doing right now. And I know that we have a number of people who are watching from home, online, including many members of my family and extended family. So hi, thank you so much. It's great to see all of you, kind of. And so my name is Liz Kleinrock. My pronouns are she, her, and I do a lot of different things. I got the start of my career working in education. I still work in education. I was an elementary school teacher for a number of years. I taught middle school. I was a librarian. And I am currently the director of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at a school in DC. And yes, I do still have my job, which is great. And I also write books. And I also do speaking, consulting, and professional development, not just for educators, but in a lot of different sectors. And I'm here today to talk about the most recent book, which came out this past fall, called What Jewish Looks Like. I also want to say I co-wrote this book. My very good friend Caroline Kusin Pritchard, who can't be here right now, but she actually has a book launch coming up called The Keeper of Stories. It's about the fire in the library tenement in Uptown. And so she'll actually be in New York next week launching her book event, so people should go to that too. But it was just such an honor and a privilege to get to work on something that is so deeply meaningful to both of us. And we come to this work in really different ways. I am a Korean-born, transracially adopted Jewish woman. Caroline is a white or white-presenting Jewish woman who is married to somebody who is Samoan, and she is raising multiracial Jewish Samoan white children. And so it was really important for us to think about the types of books that we wish we had growing up, first of all, and the types of books that we thought would really benefit not just children, but adults, and also not just within the Jewish community, but also outside of our community.
So I just want to put a pitch. We're selling the book outside. Please get a copy. It's incredible. You tell the story of 36 different people and also organizations as well. So maybe just to start, do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of the people who are in the book?
Sure. So it was really, really hard to narrow it down to 36. There was a very extensive spreadsheet situation going on. There definitely could have been like multiple volumes to this, but we wanted to try to ensure that there was balance when we were thinking about the types of stories that tend to get amplified the most. We already know that there's a deficit when it comes to Jewish literature, Jewish representation, especially in mainstream spaces. But even if you look at what does exist when it comes to Jewish identity and history and culture, it tends to be very Ashkenazi focused. And at least for me growing up, even though my family is Ashkenazi, I didn't have any books that really served as mirrors to me. And so I spent the majority of my life feeling like kind of like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole, of trying to justify to people why and how I came to be Jewish. And when people would ask things like, "You're Jewish? Like, you don't look Jewish," which is also why we titled the book What It Is, because I simply didn't have the education, the knowledge, the resources, or the language really to be able to respond to those people in ways that I think would have made me feel justified in those moments. So we're really excited about it. So there are a number of different people in here from history, from present day, who have lived all over the world, who have lived out their Jewish values in a number of different ways through different career paths. But really what unites all of these people is living their lives in a way that exemplifies Jewish values. And so a lot of books out there that are biography collections tend to be organized either chronologically or by career. But instead, the chapters that we chose are actually Jewish values in of themselves. So even the chapter themes serve as these teachable moments for folks, if you're not Jewish, to really understand what are the values that Jewish people hold really near and dear to them. So things like Tikkun Olam, like Ometz Lev, when we're talking about courage, when we're talking about seeing the value in every person, about what it means to try to repair a broken world, that these are the things that unite us, even though we might live out those values in really different ways.
So I think we definitely have a little bit of a bias here, because one of the stories you tell is Rabbi Angela Buchdahl's story. So definitely
she was like the first person I put in the spreadsheet.
definitely my favorite page of the book. But kind of, what have you learned from some of the stories you tell? Where have you found some inspiration?
I mean, I think I fluctuated in a lot, and I think during a lot of the research process, there were moments where I felt really frustrated and really angry, mainly that I think my Jewish education had been presented in such a narrow way, that there were so many people and so many stories, and that our history as Jews is so diverse and expansive and beautiful, but that was not the history that I had been exposed to the most growing up. And so when I was researching people like Ruby Myers, who was a silent film actress in India, who was one of the most famous actresses of her time, and I had never heard of her before. I had never heard of people like Victor Perez, who was a boxer from Tunisia who died in Auschwitz, but died trying to continue to defend people in his community, and never stopped being proud of who he was and what he cared about and what he believed in. One of my favorite people to research in here is the second person in the book. His name is August Bondy. He was born in Austria. He moved to the United States and was so disgusted by chattel slavery that he witnessed that he became a staunch abolitionist. His home became a stop along the Underground Railroad. He enlisted in the Union Army during the Civil War. He didn't have to. Like, he was really the exemplar of what a white abolitionist, an anti-racist person looked like in that time. Had never heard of him before we had started doing this research. And so hopefully this book is the beginning of a lot of people's education, not the end. And hopefully it sparks a lot of curiosity of people wanting to learn more about the folks in here.
This book, I think, it works on so many different levels, and I think one kind of amazing thing that you're doing is expanding notions, obviously, of what Jewish looks like, of what it means to be Jewish. But also, I really was reading this, and it's an incredible tool for fighting anti-Semitism. So if you want to talk a little bit more about how it works on that level, and also just the reception that you're getting as you're speaking to different audiences, Jewish, non-Jewish.
Sure. I mean, I think that we would be kidding ourselves if we said that we are not seeing this huge, I don't know if resurgence, because we know that anti-Semitism has always been around, but perhaps this rise in visibility and attention on anti-Semitism. And also as a DEI practitioner, it is certainly not lost on me that there are a lot of people out in the world who seem very comfortable defining who Jewish people are, even though they themselves are not Jewish, and also are very comfortable defining what is or isn't anti-Semitic, despite not experiencing that themselves. And I do think that very narrow image and idea and representation of who Jewish people are gets very convoluted, especially in the United States, that there is a certain stereotype that all Jewish people are white or present as white, or all European ancestry have certain levels of privilege. And while that is true for some, like in nearly every single community that exists, that is not the single story that represents all Jewish people. And so when Jews are represented in broad strokes like that, you end up erasing people like me, like Rabbi Buchdahl, like so many of the people that we see in this book, of people in this room as well. And so hoping that this book can serve as both a tool for unlearning and relearning, because I think, especially in my work as an educator and within DEI spaces, the unlearning part is often the hardest part. That is where we experience the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, where we really have to grapple with, maybe I do have these biases about a certain community or a group. And if that's true, what does that mean about me? I think I'm a good person, good people, or like my very binary idea of what a good person is, doesn't think things like that. So I would rather be able to prescribe to myself, I'm good, this is not something that I have a problem with, it's not me, it's everybody else. But we always have to be able to be open to seek answers and be curious, and that includes doing all of that self-work of asking ourselves these hard questions. Is it possible that maybe there are some things that I've absorbed about this entire community of people around the world that actually isn't true? But this is an opportunity to re-educate yourself.
How would you, I think this book is like, it just is kind of a roadmap to doing that kind of education and learning together. So how would you suggest somebody uses this book at home and then also kind of as a synagogue? What can we learn and how can we interact with it?
I think it kind of depends on who you are. I see my parents on Zoom. Hey, Mom and Dad,
Hi.
they're waving. Hi.
Hi, Kleinrock.
When I showed this book to my parents, my dad said that it's presented as a kid's book, but it's not really a kid's book. And I get that, because especially the front matter where we break down some of these big questions about who are Jews? Are all Jews white? What's an ethno-religion? What is anti-Semitism? Those are kind of these big understandings that you have to kind of have a good read on before you can really get into the book in ways that we're hoping readers will engage with. But I think that if you are, it's also kind of long, so especially if you're reading this with kids, you can go slow. I have a friend who has 2 kids. One is in 5th grade, one is in 2nd grade. And so when they got this book, they were just reading one biography a night together and just going through the pages like that. Or some of my other friends who have read it with their children will kind of flip through, and just depending on, the interest of the kid, of like, oh, there's a symbol on here, or it looks like this person's an athlete, that's what I want to read about tonight. But you certainly don't have to feel pressured to read it from start to front in one sitting. Unless that's your thing, then go for it.
As we know, a lot of Jewish theology and kind of who we are as a people, it really is autobiographical, it's biographical. So you have given us this incredible tool also to expand notions of Jewish theology and who we are as a people. So everybody here has such an incredibly unique story. They span thousands of years. They're coming from all over the world. But thinking about the things that the people you're talking about have in common, kind of what have you learned about what it means to be Jewish? Big question.
I'm being asked by a rabbi what it means to be Jewish. Oh gosh, okay. It's not like people haven't written volumes of books about this very question.
Not like this book, though.
I think something that unites all the people in this book is that they're all very unapologetically Jewish, that they're proud of being Jewish. And going back to this idea of Jewish values and what it means to embody these values, and there's no one-size-fits-all when it comes to being Jewish. That we are, yes, a very diverse community, we are not a monolithic community by any means, and there are still commonalities that unite us. If it's value, if it's tradition, if it's aspects of culture. Like, I will never forget going to Italy when I was a teenager. And at the time, because I was like 14, was not into the idea of going on like a tour of all the former Jewish ghettos and quarters of all these different European cities. Thanks, parents, again. But we went to synagogue, and I remember my parents telling me, even though I couldn't understand what was happening in services, isn't it really amazing that we might not be able to understand everything they're saying in Italian, but the Hebrew that we're speaking and that we're hearing is the same Hebrew that has been uttered for thousands of years, that Jews all across the diaspora have said these same words with the same intention. And I think that is so beautiful, that we're able to trace our ancestry and our culture and values in that way.
I love that. I was reminded of a few things, which is that when we leave Egypt, and Rabbi Buchdahl talks about this all the time, and it's so powerful, that we're described as an Erev Rav, this mixed multitude coming out of Egypt together. And we've always, it's right here in these pages, and we've always been this mixed multitude, and we don't come from one place, we don't speak just one language. This really incredible, expansive notion of who we are as a people. And this also, too, this idea that I love, and Rabbi Buchdahl also loves this, of being Ivrim, of being a people who are boundary crossers or border crossers. Hebrews is what it really means, to cross boundaries. And we come from all over the world. And I think what these people in common also is that they're really pioneers. They're all doing things that no one has done before. And they have a real commitment to justice. And it seems, too, that Judaism for them is a source of empathy and of a real inspiration for moral action.
Very much so.
Yeah. So it's just such an incredible gift. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I like it.
I'm also just curious, kind of, you write, as you said already, kind of in the introduction, that this is really a book that was missing in your childhood. So what was it like to write it? Was it healing? Was it enraging that you didn't have this before?
It was so cathartic. Thank you. Yes. This book was like my therapy. Truly, and the fact that it exists in the world, I honestly feel like there was a lot of anger and a lot of hurt that I got to release in that process. So I'm also just very grateful to have been able to go on this healing journey, to take some of the hurts that I experienced and turn it into something productive, like not just a physical product, but something that I hope will leave our community and others better than we found them. Because yes, while this book I think could be a really great educational resource for people who are not Jewish to learn about Jews, as I also mentioned, there's still a lot of ignorance like within our community. A story that I think I might have told you before, but might not have told all of you. During a lesson before Jewish American Heritage Month, when I was a librarian, I was working with a 4th grade class, and whenever we start conversations about communities, about culture, and things like that, I'll ask students, what do you think you know about this particular topic? And I had a student in this 4th grade class who is very proudly Jewish, had shared, I go to Hebrew school every weekend, really, really vocal about his Judaism. But when I asked the class, what do you think you know about the Jewish community, Jewish culture, Jewish identity, he was the first one to raise his hand, and he just goes, I know that there are 2 groups of Jews. I know that there are Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. And I said, that is true. Those are 2 groups within the Jewish community, and there are so many others. And then, without missing a beat, he goes, yeah, I know, but those are, the 2 most important ones. And he's in 4th grade, and he is not trying to be, he's not trying to give attitude or anything. He is what he is genuinely sharing. And so even within our community, when we have, our youth who are being raised to be really proud and aware of who they are, there are still these awareness gaps that exist, and they come up in moments like this. And so some of the, honestly, earliest moments that were, ouch moments for me came within the Jewish community, because the way that I present as a Korean person didn't match people's ideas or conceptions about what a Jewish person is supposed to look like. And we're talking about people who are even, rabbis and Jewish leaders and things like that. Goodness knows some of the things that were said to me at, Jewish summer camp, being one of, 3 kids of color who went there. And so, yes, education outside the Jewish community, and also very much within it too.
Well, I can't wait to share this book with my kids and to share it with friends who also kind of have a monolithic perception of what Jewish people look like and who we are. And there's a beautiful verse from the Psalms where we call out to God from our narrow place, and God answers us with expansiveness. And I think you are answering us with expansiveness through this book. It's a sacred task. Thank you for just bringing this to us and sharing it with our community. we're going to come back together for more questions, but Liz is going to lead us through an exercise. And you might have met Liz. Liz worked with us at Central a few years ago, helping us to build a more inclusive community, and that work is still ongoing. So we're still building these muscles of inclusion and welcome. But I'm so excited for you to teach.
Thank you. Okay, so y'all are here in this room, so you have to stay. And if you're on Zoom, don't log off just because we're doing this
We're
part.
coming
I know
back
how
together.
this works.
Yeah.
Okay, so will it be shown if you are on? Okay,
Yes.
so yes, we have this slide behind me. So if you're here in person, you should have copies of it on the table in front of you. And if you are on Zoom, hopefully this is being displayed. I can see it, wonderful. And so the infographic you have here, it's called Segments of Self-Knowledge. I also have to own that I did not create this. This is from the Seed Project, which is a really amazing organization. I've learned so much about facilitation from them. One of the best week-long trainings I've ever engaged in. But this is something that we do in our Seed seminars, which is something that we hold every month at my school. Where we get to do a little bit of reflection and interrogating about what we don't know. And I feel like I've had a lot of conversations with many different people over the past few days and weeks about the importance of curiosity. And while the concept of certainty, I think, is really important because it feels good to feel certain about certain things, it gives us a sense of stability, it gives us a sense of safety, and sometimes we forget, though, that certainty is actually the opposite of curiosity, and the importance of making sure that even when we think we so deeply know something, that we still have to be able to approach everything from an open mind. So what you have here, the segments of self-knowledge, represents a number of things that we can see, and I'll read out. Some of the smaller segments, we can think about the information out in the world of what we know about a particular topic. There is also a good portion of information of what we know that we don't know. We are aware of our awareness gaps in this case. And then we have what we don't know that we know, things that we might be reminded of, like when we're cued in. But the very largest part of this pie here is what we don't know that we don't know. Okay, are you with me still?
I'm with you.
Yes, okay. So using this framework, I love if everyone can take a couple of minutes, if you're here in person, to talk with maybe one or two people at your table or have a group discussion. If you are on Zoom at home, grab somebody. If you are in the same room as someone, or for somebody to come in and talk to you. The questions that we see on the right side of the screen, which is growing up, how were conversations about Jewish identity modeled for you inside and outside of your home? And feel free to use these prompts. So a message about Jewish identity that I knew was something about Jewish identity that raised a question for me, something that I didn't know, and something that I didn't know until I heard it. And sorry, from an earlier thing, it says the blog. That doesn't apply to this. Don't worry about that. But as you're having these conversations, and if you feel comfortable sharing some of the responses to these questions, the framework around windows and mirrors is from Dr. Udine Sims Bishop, who talks about how books mainly can serve as opportunities to see parts of yourself reflected, and also opportunities for you to explore new ideas and identities and experiences from somebody else's point of view. So are there particular windows and mirrors that have coming up for you when you're talking to other people and sharing these stories? And how did what you saw, heard, and felt balance with what you have been taught about Jewish identity? They're really big questions that we're going to do in a short period of time.
Amazing, yeah. So we'll take maybe 10 minutes together, and we'll break off in groups on Zoom. We'll talk at tables here. We can come around and listen if that's okay, and then we'll come back together and do some sharing, and then you also have an opportunity to ask Liz a question. So thank you, guys. Looking forward to the conversation.
Okay. So if you're here in person, we'll start to wrap up our conversation. If you are on Zoom, thank you for sticking with us and not leaving once the breakout room started. We really appreciate that. We have a couple of minutes to hear some of your stories. I know that we gave you a lot of different prompts, so please don't feel like you have to answer all of them, nor do you have to share anything that you're not comfortable sharing. But if there's any part, something that came up in your conversation that you would like to share out from the discussion, please feel free to do so. If you're here in person, you can raise your hand. Hilly's going to come over with the mic, and if you are on Zoom, you can also use the raise hand function, and we can call on you that way as well. Just remember to unmute yourself. And the reminder that I always will give when facilitating is if you had a great conversation with somebody else, just remember that in this share, you're speaking on behalf of yourself. If you are going to share anything that someone else shared, please make sure that you have that person's permission to do so.
Well, we three are a very diverse Jewish group, for sure, because Sylvia was born a Christian and converted to Judaism, and she grew up in Israel, where everyone was Jewish, and I grew up in New York, where it was very diverse and very obvious, all the different groups of Judaism, talking about Reform, conservative, Orthodox, Reconstructionist, whatever, non-observant Jews, observant Jews. So we all had different questions and different perceptions of everything about our lives and everything in terms of looking at people who were of different religions and people who are Jewish and looking at all of those groups differently.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
So for me, I think I always knew to some extent that my mother's side was Jewish. The big question mark was understanding later in life that she had or my grandfather had taken her and the family and left the more Orthodox community to go 5 hours north away from it. And I grew up also with my father being Moroccan and Italian Catholic. So I feel my experience has been interesting in that I have had kind of an indirect relationship with it a lot of my life, and then being able to engage with it in a way that I felt safe. This congregation has helped me to do that because I feel like everybody is truly welcome here. But for me, I feel more recently it's been understanding a lot more on my mother's side and what it is, and trying to piece that together, and also understanding the more positive parts out of that, and that there is so much really beauty in Judaism that is worth getting to know, and being able to separate, some of the things that, had happened in my family in the Orthodox community that aren't necessarily Jewish and are more just community.
Thank you so much for that.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it.
If anyone on Zoom wants to say anything, just use that raise hand function. We'll call on you next.
I grew up in an area where we were the only Jew. I was the only Jew in my school, from kindergarten through 6th grade. But we're very well aware of the fact that there was something special about what we had, and my father's family was in Borough Park. So we used to go to Borough Park, and my father would explain, who was what, and why these people looked like the people in our neighborhood who were nuns, but the people in Borough Park were also wearing all black. And I used to say to my father, is this the same thing? He says, yeah, it's all the same thing. But my mother qualified for the Olympics in 1940 as a swimmer. And the Olympics were canceled because it was to be held in Tokyo in 1940. But what we learned, we had cartons of medals, but none of them had her name on it. And my mother explained to us that she had to swim under a different name because the name Shapiro, she would not have been permitted into any of the venues. she would have been permitted probably into the Women's Swimming Association, but she couldn't swim under the name Shapiro. So once the Olympics were canceled, she was at a meet in Baltimore, and a photographer came up and said, "What's your name?" And she said, "My name is Harriet Taylor." Her mother's maiden name was Thaler, so they used Taylor. So she said, "My name is Harriet Taylor." And then she said, "You know, to tell you the truth, my name is Harriet Shapiro." And the photographer turns out to have been Jewish and put her photograph on the entire back page of the Baltimore Sun. But for us, what it was a victory. You know, seeing that photograph and knowing that in that moment she was allowed to be who she was and she didn't have to hide her name and so on. And it was a great victory. And I have that photograph up in my apartment because it really, she hated swimming. But that was, yeah, I think it was a thing that's the only way she got her father's approval. But it was a very significant thing for us that, you know, at that moment she had the victory of actually telling her name. And not having to pretend and not having to make excuses for it.
I think you should write a picture book about that.
Jill?
Jill, unmute yourself again.
I'm a little embarrassed to say this. I said it in the chat, but I'll say it anyway. So I grew up, secular, and I only heard Lador Vador and understood what it meant in the last, let's say, 10, 15 years. And when I hear Lador Vador, especially, when everyone's lined up on the bima for a bar bat mitzvah, I always think, well, what about someone who converted? I mean, their door vador is not Jewish. And when you do a line back from Sinai, they're not Jewish. And I understand that, okay, I'm being too, word for word, and there is a broader, feeling about it, but that's my question that I'm embarrassed to say.
You don't have to be embarrassed, but thank you for raising that. And there actually is an amazing Jewish teaching that every Jewish soul, whether they've converted, however they're born, was at Sinai too. So we actually go back generations and are connected in so many ways, through text, through our stories, through our practice, through our rituals, the ways we live our life. So yeah, the Dor Vador is everybody.
And thank you for being vulnerable and sharing that.
Yeah, great question.
Mary?
Okay, so this is one of the things, and I'm sorry I'm in the dark because I'm dealing with a sick dog, but this is one of the things that I would like for us to have conversations about and understand is, in the chat, I made a comment about the bima of Central presents white, and a response was senior rabbi. So I said, in a response to it was, but what if Rabbi Angela is not there? So these are the things that we're missing, because in most spaces, when we're dealing with Jewish institutions, they're presenting white. The leadership is presenting white. We're not getting people of color as rabbis being hired in places of leadership, as cantors, this type of thing. So these are the real dialogues that we are actually missing. And it seems to be a problem in the United States. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's fairly accurate. If you're going to go into most synagogues in the United States, clergy, in terms of racial appearance, is going to appear usually white or white presenting. We also have to look at the diaspora and where Jews of different origins ended up prior to the Holocaust, after the Holocaust as well, as well as where we are in the United States too. I lived in Los Angeles for a number of years, and there's a much larger Sephardic and Persian population out there who are Jewish too, and so the synagogue makeup, I know, has looked different out there in places I've attended compared to here on the East Coast, especially in the Mid-Atlantic region.
Yeah, I think what I've really learned from Liz over the years is that inclusion and making sure people are represented and is a process. I mean, this is a posture that we have to live our lives in as individuals and as a community. There's always work to do. So thank you. I completely agree. This book that you present, so incredible, and I'm not sure if we see those stories yet kind of in Jewish leadership today. Not everybody is represented in these amazing stories that you're bringing. So there's so much work to do. Yeah. Well, one more online.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. A couple of things. One is, let me just mute my speaker. Hold on 1 sec. Is that when you talk about Le Dovador or other examples, there is a gap between what the rabbis and educated people understand versus what the general Jewish population's sort of understanding and appreciation is. So you can talk about Le Dovador concept, as you just explained, but then somebody sitting next to me and said, oh, but you didn't have a grandmother that you inherited your recipe from. Well, my brisket recipe comes from Fresh Direct's website, okay? But you know, like I had to start the tradition somewhere. So there is this gap, like, okay, where does it translate to in everybody's sort of basic understanding? And the other thing I want to say is, a lot of people are curious. They look at me and say, is she Jewish? Is she not Jewish? If she is Jewish, how did she become Jewish? I really wish there was a way to get the message across to those people, to be a little sensitive. It's personal, and people may or may not want to share all the personal stories, but it's like talking about children who are adopted, and my child is also adopted. So it's like, oh, where is he from? How'd you get him? Whatever. All these stories, people are curious, but just because you're curious and just because you're positively curious, you may end up still hurting people or upsetting people.
I think that's a really good point, because oftentimes I think when we do have those really intense moments of curiosity, it can make us also feel very entitled to getting answers for our curiosity.
Yeah.
And in those moments, being able to check ourselves and think about, you know, it's good to be curious, and is this really the most appropriate time and place? What is my relationship with this person? Is it really for my benefit? You know, going back to the whole intention versus impact piece. So thank you for raising that. How are we on time? Okay.
5 minutes. Any questions for Liz as well, in addition to sharing?
Is there a story you can tell from your book, a more contemporary person?
Oh, more contemporary person. Yeah, so the first person in our book, her name is Naomi Wadler. She's actually from the DC area, and we first came to know her and her work because she was one of the main student speakers at March for Our Lives after the Stoneman Douglas shooting. She is Ethiopian, also transracial adoptee, and had this incredible national platform. She spoke so beautifully, and her activism we thought was actually a really great way to kick off this book, because she came to she stepped onto that platform as a student, and reminding our young readers that you don't have to wait to become an adult to make that sort of positive impact in the community.
Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Anything we haven't asked you yet, Liz? Anything else you want to share? We've asked everything.
Not so much a question, but I do want to say the speaker that's on Zoom, I resonate with that a lot, because I feel like that is correct. It's like, you know, oh, well, you don't have this, or, you know, necessarily this experience, and does that make you any less? And I don't think it does. You know, I think if we're here right now and, you know, we're doing our best to be a part of it, that's enough, you know.
Oh, I really encourage everyone to get the book, to get it as a gift, to give it away. I mean, it's incredible. It's an incredible gift, and it really just illustrates that we have always been a diverse people, and a resilient people, and an incredibly brave people. We come from all over the world, and there is no one way to be or to look or to practice Judaism. And it is an affirmation of that, and also really a source of courage and inspiration for today, when in so many ways who we are as Jews is limited sometimes by ourselves and also by the outside world, that you have given us this expansive gift to really see ourselves differently and understand that there is room for everyone and room to grow as a people and individually. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for sharing yourself with our community today. And it's amazing to bring you back to Central, and I'm excited to keep up the conversation. So thank you, Liz.
Thank you for holding space for the conversation.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. Books in the back, and will you sign some copies? Oh yeah, so get a copy and get it signed. And thank you all. Have a good night.